All right. All right, let's make sure that this is up and running. All right, I think that we are, Facebook always drags its feet getting up. All right, I think we are ready to go. Are we good, sir?
Looks like it's okay to me.
Yeah, are you good to go?
I'm good to go.
All right, so let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and I am elated. Y'all know when we talk about education, I get very, it's near and dear to me because by nature, I'm an educator. It may not seem that way, but by nature, I'm an educator. So anybody that's in that field or working towards that field is always a dear friend. And it's always an honor to have them because if you can deal in education or anything remotely close to education, you can almost do anything because there's just so many moving parts to it. So I am so honored to have today's guest in the studio, Dr. Stephen Dolinger. I did pronounce that right, correct? Did I pronounce that right?
Got it.
Okay, so let me make sure I pronounce that right. So how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. Sunny day in Atlanta.
Is it really? I haven't even been outside. I'm only looking through the window and the sun keeps going up and down. So I hadn't really deciphered, but I'll take your word for it. All right. So introduce yourself to the people and give them a little bit about your background, where you went to school, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Okay, Ricardo, we're talking about 6 or 7 decades here, so I'll give the short version, all right?
I'll do that.
Okay, I was, born in the mountains of North Carolina. My dad's older brothers had gone to Washington, D.C. to be carpenters, and they thought they were making a lot of money. And they said, hey, little brother, why don't you come to D.C.? So my dad did that. We had a suitcase and didn't pan out for him in the rainy, cold weather, so he became a policeman. 30 years later, he retired. So I grew up there in DC and in the suburbs. One of the best decisions I ever made in my life was a good buddy of mine, Frankie Mendoza, and I went to the mountains of North Carolina again to go to college, got our act together, did better at learning how to study, went to a 4-year school, majored in business, minored in econ and math. And then I had an uncle who was teaching and working in HR in Fairfax County, Virginia. And he to do that. I thought, okay, that's interesting. Kind of like you say, education. I didn't realize it then, but it was a big part of Steve Dolinger. So I started working there and spent the first quarter century growing up in that big school system, kind of like Gwinnett County is here. Was a teacher, principal, math curriculum specialist, an area superintendent, and then started my mentor, Mrs. Torres, said I ought to be a superintendent someday. But she said I wouldn't do it in Fairfax because they typically hire from outside. So I started doing those interviews and luckily got a job here in Georgia. Came to Fulton County in 1995, became superintendent there, learned to run a large organization. I used to love to tell the business community I had more buses than MARTA, 70 restaurants, 10,000 employees, but our main competency was teaching kids. I did that for 7 years and then was approached to come to the Georgia Partnership. And I've been here now for 18 years, working with a good little team here and doing some good work across our state, helping that education pipeline, we call it. So that's
okay. Good deal. Wow. That was a good abridged version. I think everybody got the gist of it, so it's a good abridged version. So let me ask you about transitioning from being actually in the classroom to a more administrative role as a superintendent. What was that transition like? Because now you're going from essentially hands-on to more administrative to a bigger team. So what was that transition like?
Well, Carter, I was lucky to have some stages during my career. I remember going from middle school to high school as a teacher and administrator, and people would say, "Don't you miss that?" And I go from a high school back to a middle school, and they said, "Well, don't you miss the high school?" The answer was always yes, but the focus was on the kids primarily, but then supporting the teachers to do their work. So then when I became a principal, that took me another step, but still that focus was not to be away from the kids, but to help on a larger scale to make sure they got their education. Going to a superintendent, that was a bigger leap because, like I was teasing a minute ago, you're running a large corporation. And most superintendents across the country are running one of the largest businesses in their town. So I had to do that. Management's a big piece, but leadership is really the secret in all of those positions. So I had to learn then to keep my eye on the main thing, which was the kids, but then help teachers, help central office staff. So it was a transition, but still make sure the focus is on the main thing that I always called it.
How much is agenda setting a part of being in a supervisory role, such as a superintendent? Because I know when you're in the actual system, the agenda is kind of already set for you and you just kind of execute it. When you're in a supervisor's position, such as a superintendent, I'm sure that agenda. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's interesting, Ricardo. You work with young leaders and they hear that they're supposed to have a vision for the organization. A lot of times they get stressed. It's like, I don't really have that vision yet. What would it be? What's that vision? But as a superintendent, you need to have that and you need to do it, but you can't do it in the top down stuff just doesn't really work. You know that with your leadership work. So it's inspiring that shared vision and bringing people together to help focus that. And then once it gets focused, then as a leader, you got a responsibility to bring.
Yesterday we talked to Bob Rogers. Bob Rogers is the CEO of Street Grace, which is a nonprofit that deals with sex trafficking. And he was talking about passion. He shared his story about going from the private sector at a college to going to a nonprofit, and he spoke a lot to passion. How much of that did that play in you doing what you do? Like, was there a moment that you had that you were just like, this is what I really love to do, this is what I want to do, or was it just kind of you were rolling with the punches?
Well, mentoring helps all that. I think many of the successful leaders they look back, they'll see mentors in their life. And I had some, I mentioned a few minutes ago, a wonderful woman who kept urging me, pulling me or pushing me to go forward. But you just gave me a flashback, Ricardo. It was in between when I was leaving Fairfax and coming to be a superintendent in Fulton. Wasn't really sure about that, but again, my wife was very supportive. What she calls an Army brat. So she's like, well, let's go. We can move. Our sons were going off to college, so we were empty nesters. We took a road trip vacation, and we would go into these little towns, and you'd come into the town, you'd see a church steeple, and I don't know what compelled us, but we would drop into these little churches, different denominations, and pray, and enjoy a few. the headhunter who was trying to help place me in Fulton kept calling us. And finally she said, well, they're going to maybe go with the other guy. And I was number 2. And I said, hey, don't call me anymore. It's okay. So I got back home, and and my wife had gone downstairs to get some coffee, and I was getting dressed, and the TV came on, and it was the morning show from Atlanta, Georgia, getting ready for the Olympics. My wife said, ooh, this is just a little too spooky. She turned off the TV. I came down. She didn't say anything. I go to work, and I get a call from the headhunter and said, things fell through with the other guy. They want you to come to Atlanta. And it was this feeling, Ricardo, like that whole religious journey, so to speak, during that summer just led me here. And it's like, yeah, that's the work I was supposed to do next. Thank you for helping me think.
See, there's always a story. There's always a story. I've learned that there's always a story. Always. Been from in the classroom, the superintendent, to the position you're in now. How do you view leadership? Like, what has always been your stance on leadership, especially going through all these different types of positions that require different types of interactions and things of that magnitude, different types of teams? So what has always been your stance on leadership, or what is your current stance on leadership?
Well, I've been a student of leadership. I've been a professor of leadership, and I've been a practitioner. So I've learned, and I'm still learning to try to be a better leader. The part in that whole journey that stuck with me the most and resonated for me was the work of Kouzes and Posner back in the 90s. It's called the Leadership Challenge. And they had 5 pieces of that is part of the Leadership Challenge. Challenge in the process, kind of like your book on conflict, enabling others to act, modeling the way, then inspiring that shared vision we were talking about a few minutes ago. And then the 5th thing is encouraging the heart. The challenge is doing all those things almost all the time. And it's kind of like I've heard you talk about the conflict piece. It's going to happen. But how do you model the way that supports people to challenge the process? For example, if you say you want continuous improvement, you want feedback from people, and someone says, hey, boss, we might want to do this a little bit differently. You go, no, we've done that before, it doesn't work. Or they give you an idea and you go, that's a stupid idea. What? Are you serious? They're not going to come back to you and give you feedback again. So it's that supporting your team and enabling them to give feedback so that you can continue to keep getting, build that trust with your team, however big that team is. If it's a corporation, it's got to cascade down from the CEO down through the whole organization. Or if it's a small team like I have now with 7 of us, it's still important that they feel enabled to challenge the process and make us even better. And then the last part about, well, inspiring the vision, we talked about that a few minutes ago, they've got to help you with that too. But then encouraging the heart, it's not just a pat on the back every now and then. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be real, to where they know that you really mean that, hey, you're doing a heck of a good job. So it's those 5 pieces, Ricardo, that resonate with me back then, and they stay with me. They stay with me today.
Okay, good deal. I see you're familiar with my work. I'm so honored that you're familiar with my work. I feel special right about now. So we were talking about when you were sharing your journey, you were saying that the younger generation always talks about vision. So a lot of my work deals with the different generations. Tell me about your experiences with them. What do you observe from working? Because I know you work with a lot of different generations in education. So tell me about how you find working with the different generations, attributes that you see, things of that magnitude.
Well, I find it interesting to read about the generalizations about my group, the baby boomers, Gen X.
Y'all are an interesting group.
Yeah, you are. The millennials. it's interesting to hear about those. Not on our small team here, I've got all that. So it's interesting to look at them. And I don't think it's really, I was going to say fair or appropriate to label them, all the people in a generation, that they're going to be a certain type of person. Because I've got some millennials here who are not under the stereotypical umbrella. They're, some of them are a little bit more like maybe even a baby boomer generation or Gen X. So I think what you need to do with people, regardless of their generation, or their race or their religion or their gender, is to work with them as individuals. And back to that, building the culture, you know, whatever it is, they can give you that feedback like, you know, I don't need so much direction. And you can have that candid conversation, or they can say, I need more direction. Please give me more feedback about my performance. So if you have that culture that's built, I don't know that the different generations is really a big factor.
Okay, very valid point. Very valid point. I like what you were saying about culture building. Can you speak to that? Because like I said, you've gone from all these great positions, and I know, you know, when you walk into a place, sometimes there's a culture that's built that may not be great. Other times you walk in, there's no culture at all. So talk about culture building for me.
Well, it takes time. You're right. I tell it's toxic. And in fact, there was one time in my career where it was so toxic. I talked to my mentor and I said, you know, this is just not a good place to be. And she said, Steve, you've proven in some pretty positive environments and contributed to that. You've got to prove that you can work in a challenging environment. So I was like, yes, ma'am, you know, I'll do that. And then you try then from the inside to make that better. But it was interesting. I just read something recently where, particularly now on LinkedIn and on with tweets, that people are giving a lot of leadership feedback. But one of them said that a culture can only be as strong as the worst behavior that the leader will tolerate. So if the leader is going to tolerate a lot of bad behavior, it's difficult then for the team to try to help make that better. But you can still try. But I think about those experiences and I think, by gosh, I don't want to be that kind of a leader. So you try to work with folks. And one of the worst things to work with is if you have a staff member who isn't a team player, who might be divisive or doesn't work at the speed of the rest of the team. You have to deal with that. And you try to set them up for success as much as you can until they prove that it's not going to happen, and you may have to let them go. But then the other team sees that, and then sometimes it's good. You know, they understand that person wasn't really a good fit for our team. But it's being candid and giving people feedback and let them know you're not really on their case or really trying to beat them up. You're giving them feedback to help them get better, to help the team be better. And then you can keep that going. And usually they appreciate that.
Okay. All right. So you've been in the education system for a good minute. We won't get into ages, but you've been in the education system for a good minute. What are some of the differences that you're seeing, some of the issues, per se, that you're seeing then versus now? Like, how does it look, the state of education? We'll say Georgia particularly, or just in general, either one or both. What does that look like to you now?
Well, it's changing a lot. It's evolving. There have been little episodes over the years where educators would get creative. There's a time when they had schools without walls internally, a lot of teamwork. Then they put walls back up again, and it got more regimented. We went through that whole phase of increased accountability. People were, I think, perhaps overly testing, but they had this idea of, Delta has to have their metrics to make sure their flights are on time. Doctors had their metrics about how many patients they may lose or can heal. Educators, therefore, should have metrics, how well they're educating our kids. Well, of course, the public should know that. But in education, we tend to swing the pendulum too far every time, most times. and take some corrective action to come back. I think we went perhaps too far with the accountability. The overall premise was pretty good. Leave no child behind. That sounds good. Looking at data of disaggregated groups is good to make sure that none of those groups were falling behind other kids. That was good, but it was just too much. So now it's going to be interesting to see, particularly now with the coronavirus, and they've gotten rid of a lot of tests here at this end of the year. How is the pendulum going to swing back, or will it moderate that? Yes, we do have to have some accountability to know how kids are doing, particularly starting this next school year to know where kids are after this lost education time. But we don't have to beat schools up. We're learning now there's a lot of important pieces to measuring education, more important perhaps than just a test. And it's how well that teacher's working and the kid's working. So that pendulum keeps swinging back and forth. The use of technology. I was on the Georgia Chamber Zoom this morning with Lieutenant Governor, and he's talking about how Bud Peterson, the former president of Georgia Tech University, is chairing his technology committee. And they're saying that what they've been doing with the legislature to get them involved and starting to Zoom and have meetings and public disclosure of meetings, more public engaged, that they said they have moved what would have taken them 5 years in 8 days. Georgia Tech turned that around. Not a lot of consultants, some of their sharp students and staff. So what does that mean now for legislative processes? What does that mean for education? We've seen schools try to pivot and go to virtual classrooms. Well, with some more training and better technology, what does that mean? So that technological leap is going to be fun to watch.
Well, I guess that would be my next theory is because technology takes over a lot of fields, education can't really be exempt from that field. What do you think is going to look like in the fall? Like, what would be your advice since you've been in it for a minute? What do you think it's going to look like in the fall after we've had to work with kids on Zoom, or since we've had to have more virtual meetings? What do you think how do you think that's going to reform education going into the fall semester, since these kids were not physically in classrooms?
Ricardo, I'm really, really concerned about starting school in the fall. Typically, you have the excitement. You have some anxiety of kids, particularly if they're going from elementary to middle or middle to high. But there's going to be a lot of trauma walking through that schoolhouse door this fall. These kids have, some of them have been nurtured quite well by their parents. Some kids who live in other communities or families probably have been suffering more trauma. Teachers have been stressed. They've been trying to teach their classes and take care of their own kids. They've had a load. I've seen that with our staff. Those of us that don't have kids at home are handling it a lot easier than if you've got kids running around, not understanding why mom or daddy can't play if they're in the house. But teachers have been busy too. So there's a lot of trauma going to walk through that schoolhouse door. And then, as we were hinting at a few minutes ago, we talk about the summer slide, how much education kids might forget, particularly in mathematics or their reading skills. Now they're talking about the COVID slide, because it's going to be a longer window of time that they may not have had the best education at the end of the year. So where are they? Now, there are going to be some schools where kids are just fine. But you go across Georgia and rural Georgia, while their schools may have internet connectivity, the homes do not. And I've heard from some superintendents that 50% of their kids have not been online. So you talk about the loss of education, the tension, the stress they've had during the summer. Our teachers and principals and counselors have their hands full when school starts this fall.
So I guess the question that comes from me, because I'm an analytical person, so I guess the question that comes from me is, how will you know what they don't know, especially if we're trying not to be as stringent with standardized tests and things of that magnitude? So how do you think they're going to be able to handle figuring out where these kids actually are? Because that now you're talking about we're going into summer, but you kind of started earlier because you kind of caught the end of spring. So how do you think they're going to be able to fill that gap, in your professional opinion, or how would they fill that gap to decipher what they know and what they don't know?
Well, two pieces. One of the easier pieces will be some kind of a test, and schools could have their own test. The Department of Education has testing materials online where you can download some tests. They'll have to be, even if it's a teacher-made test, particularly elementary school, something that will be quick hit to see their math skills and reading skills. But then there's that other part of the professionalism of teachers who may have known their kids before. And if Steve was a little guy who sometimes would get upset about things, or they know that maybe I don't have a strong family situation, I've got some challenges, they're going to be looking to see how Steve's handling things. So it's both that quantitative piece, it could be perhaps easier, but that qualitative piece, that human piece, the teacher's going to have their antenna up for that too, I believe.
Okay, so personal experience with their actual students, getting to know the students, things of that magnitude. Makes sense. All right, so let's get into the partnership. For those that do not know what that is, tell us what the partnership is, what it does, what it was designed to do, all that great stuff.
Well, short answer is we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. We do research and policy around education. We were created about 25 years ago by the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia Association of Economic Developers. They saw a need that what we call the birth to work pipeline wasn't as strong in Georgia as it needed to be. And they created our organization to help look at the issues along that pipeline and make them stronger. What's weak, what's missing, what could be made stronger. We have an interesting board that has a lot of the education association leaders, like the School Board Association, the Superintendent Association, some of the teacher groups. A lot of people by virtue of their position. We're nonpartisan, but we have the House and Senate Education Committee chairs, the state superintendent, technical college commissioner, a lot of those kind of people on our board. But the rest of our leadership is always business leaders, and my chair is always a business leader. Right now, it's Mike Donnelly with Wells Fargo. It's been Kevin Greiner with Gas South, Paul Bowers with Georgia Power. So we always have that good business leader to give us that kind of focus of the work we're doing. We do a lot of convening. We call it convening, connecting, and communicating. And we feel we're pretty good at all three of those. We convene by having forums, bringing people together. We're talking now, how do we take advantage of this new Zooming, that our forums may be different in the future? We connect by going out into communities and bringing communities together. We feel that schools can't do this tough work by themselves. They need business leaders, other community leaders to help them. So we connect people together. And we communicate in a lot of ways. I know you had our communication director and our vice president on your show previously talking about our top 10 issues to watch. Your listeners can see that online. It's our 16th edition. They're not all the issues, but they get into 10 issues and talk about that issue for Georgia, why it's significant, and we try to get into so what should be done about that. That's part of our work. We also have a leadership program. It's called Education Policy Fellows. About 17 states have a group like that, and it's like the partnership, business, government, education, community leaders. And it's kind of like Leadership Atlanta. It's a year-long class once a month. And then those 17 states go to DC in the spring every year. So we get some people who want to be advocates for education and want to learn how to do that better. So we give them that opportunity that they can do that kind of work. We do a lot of articles for magazines, newspapers. Good article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution last week. Maureen Downey had a blog. In her blog, she had our op-ed that we put in. When we roll out our top 10 issues every year, we hold a media symposium that brings reporters from around the state. We get about 30 reporters. We get some of the big guns from the Atlanta Journal and some of the TV stations. But what's really cool are bringing young reporters from around the state who this might be their new beat. Education might be a new beat. So we help them with the issues. They get 10 issues to write about right away. But then Robert Gaines, our communication director, is a resource for them the rest of the year to help them understand issues that come up or legislation that they just may not understand. So that's some of our work. Again, we're nonpartisan, so we come at it from the research and try to help legislators and other leaders solve some of these problems.
Okay. Okay. All right. So leading through and beyond change. I know a lot of, and we go back to agenda setting. I know that the agendas were set at the beginning of the year, probably to kind of ride out the year. How did you guys have to pivot when COVID hit and, you know, everything changed and all that good stuff? How were you able to pivot, and what did you guys have to pivot? Like, did you change your objectives, things of that magnitude?
Actually, we didn't change objectives. Interesting question. The top 10 issues that I'm just talking about, we launched in January. And this year we took a little harder dive into the equity issues and leveling the playing field for kids across Georgia. Again, that birth to work pipeline, we saw a report recently from Southern Region Education Board, SREB, said that if we don't improve that pipeline of workers by 2030, we're going to have 1.5 million Georgians unemployed. 1.5 million. So we took a pretty hard stand on, here are the things across that pipeline, everything from early learning to issues outside of school that can impact kids' learning, transitions to college or even to work. And we hit that pretty hard. Well, COVID-19 hits. We had the conversation, okay, what do we do to stay relevant? What do we have to do in this new environment that we can help keep moving Georgia forward and not take a step back? Well, Ricardo, where we've come out is we can't afford to go back to normal. We have to really move ahead, because the conversation we've had earlier about my concern about going through the schoolhouse door this fall, the challenges are exacerbated. They've increased. So we have more issues. And while we know there are a lot of smart kids living in poverty, we know they have more challenges. And now we have even more kids living in poverty. They have more challenges. We've got to provide the resources to help those kids catch up, keep up, and fill that pipeline we need, or it's going to be worse than 101.5 million by 2030. So we didn't have to pivot. We just have to put the pedal down.
So the conversation about vocational schools has come back up, and I'm older now, so I'm actually 40. So in my day, vocational schools were a big thing. You went to school, you learned a trade, and you kind of kept it pushing. College was always pushed, but they were almost on equal footing. That if college just wasn't for you, then you went to a vocational school. I feel like over the last couple of years, we've seen not so much a demise, but just kind of a slight vanishing of vocational schools. Is that a conversation we need to really start having again? Because I know when we talk about real estate, I have a lot of friends that are in real estate and in that industry, and they talk about the lack of just basic individuals that you need, electricians, all those kinds of positions. Is that a conversation we need to revisit about the reemergence of vocational schools? Will that help with the 1 million?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the language has changed somewhat. The old vocational school, when I was a high school principal, we had a wing on our building. It was called a vocational wing. Well, sometimes those were kids who weren't performing very well academically. So the language has changed to call it a technical school. And we've got the Technical College System of Georgia, TCSG. Well, yes, we need to focus on that. Georgia's doing a really good job. We're leading in the country with our pathways to careers. There are nearly 20 pathways now the high school kids can take that will get them into maybe a science pathway. They could even focus that more on nursing or being a paramedic. But going off to college or going into the military, options now are also with the technical colleges. And students can start in high school. Legislation update this and made this process even better, or at least they started this last session. They got to come back in a few weeks and finish it. But students can dual enroll in high school and college, technical college, come out at the end of that and have both a high school diploma and a 2-year degree at a technical college. So if they're smart and focused, they can get both those degrees. But when we say we need more kids with diplomas, we're not talking about just a 4-year degree or 2. It could be just a certificate. Kids with a welding certificate can go down to Savannah and get a job at $80,000 a year. I was making a presentation the other day to a group of business leaders, and there was a person there from Georgia Pacific. He raised his hand. He said, Steve, if you can find me that person, I'll give him $100,000. That's with welding skills. So, do you want to go to college for 4 years? Well, the bad thing that's happening in Georgia is we have some kids who will get to their third year of college. They can't keep in there and they'll drop out, and they have college debt. They have that burden and not the 4-year degree to get them a better paying job. Well, that's really trauma. So then they're living in their parents' basement and can't afford to pay off their debt, and things really start spiraling down for them. So yeah, we have to have better information out there for kids, and it could be counselors with better information to give to kids, business leaders going into schools and talking about what, career pathways. So the technical degree could be a faster, better way to get college. I talked to a technical college president last year, and she was saying that a fourth of her students have a 4-year degree. They're coming back to the technical college to get a skill, to get a job. So you're right on point, Ricardo. We need to talk more about technical colleges and not just a 4-year degree.
Okay. Legislation. So in the past, you've had bills or dichotomies like No Child Left Behind that were very specific about objectives and rubrics and all that good stuff. Do you feel that legislation currently is as stringent and as focused as legislation like No Child Left Behind, or are we trying to stay afloat as education vastly changes from things like technology or stuff like that?
I think we're going to see a backing off of strict legislation. We hear a lot about local control, but I think it's going to be more flexibility. Superintendent Woods, state superintendent, is backing off a lot of the required testing. He's gotten approval from the feds to do that. I think there'll be some more flexibility. We have been working with school districts on what we call an assessment inventory, helping them look at how much testing they're doing, how much is really required, and what can they do to do the proper amount of testing to see where their kids are without over testing and taking too much time. But I think legislation will be a little bit more flexible for a while. We just have to be careful. Well, let me say that the partnership doesn't lobby. We do work with our colleagues and give them information and research. A piece that we worked on several years ago with a really nice grant from the Rosetta Foundation. We looked at what are high-performing countries and states doing to help education policy. And we came up with 7 buckets. You can probably guess what most of them are. It's quality teachers, quality leaders, early learning, solid funding. Well, in those 7 buckets, then, we gave that research to some of our business leaders, and they said, we can't handle all that. Can you do an infographic or something that'll help us digest it more quickly? So we came up with what we call a stoplight format. We've had the 7 areas, and it's red, yellow, and green. Green, with that policy in Georgia, we are good to go compared to high-performing states and countries. Yellow, maybe it needs more funding or broader implementation across the state. Red, that's where we need help. That's where we should focus. And we've shared this with not just business and education leaders, but legislators, and suggest that if it's green, leave it alone. Don't play in that. But if it's red, that's what we need to address. For example, Georgia is one of 2 states that does not have a needs-based scholarship. We have Hope, which is great, but for kids who don't have a lot of money and don't have that high of a grade, but still want to go to college, we don't have support for them. We have a program called Reaches, but it's not statewide yet. So we've got some things in place, and we are leading this work I've talked about. Is called EdQuest, and we have a coalition called the EdQuest Coalition, which are a lot of, again, business, government, education leaders that are focused on these issues. And we're gearing up right now with this session coming up, well, the time to come up to finish this legislative session to see what we might work on. And the key piece right now is with this drastic 15% cut that people have to make, what can we say should stay on the table? And please keep some of these pieces alive and well. But yeah, I think legislation is going to be more flexible, but we still got to keep focused and keep driving legislators on the correct pieces of legislation that will move Georgia forward. And that's part of our EdQuest.
So as we move forward, especially because we got to have some kind of rubric that measures the success of these students outside of just their grades. Teacher retention, because when I think about retention, when you think about retention within an organization, it's kind of like, okay, well, depending on the organization, a high turnover rate may be normal or it may be abnormal. With teaching, it's not really an industry that I think there should be a high turnover rate, yet we're seeing a lot of vacancies for teachers. In your professional opinion, because you've been in the classroom, I know the education has kind of changed, but I would love to hear your thoughts on why we're not able to retain good talent in the education field when teachers are vital to the education field.
Well, we start out by just saying teaching's tough. It's a tough job. It's a tough job.
Absolutely.
When we have even more students, I mentioned coming to school from impoverished homes, a lot of them are smart kids and they're wanting to learn, but a lot of them come with challenges. So they have more issues they're bringing into the classroom the teacher has to deal with. It's nice that we have the concept of community schools where we might have dentists or doctors who will come into the school and kids don't have to leave to go to a dentist. We're bringing mobile units to schools to screen kids for vision and giving them free glasses. That's been happening in the metro area. But it's a tough job for teachers to manage all that. The part of the key is back, Ricardo, to the conversation we had earlier about building that culture and the leader. You can look at schools and find leaders that are nurturing their teachers. They're not babying them. They're nurturing and supporting their teachers and helping to support them where the teachers are saying they have issues and barriers that they can do a better job. That's part of the work we have to do. A part of that is, and this is back when I was a superintendent, we were losing teachers who were going to other counties in the area. And I talked to our HR staff and we didn't know why. So we worked with one of our business partners at UPS and they said, Steve, you got to know why they're leaving before they leave. So it's part of that, talking to teachers, having surveys, getting feedback, addressing the issues they bring up so that they want to stay in that environment. And part of the survey results are, what would make you stay or leave your school? Many of them say the leader. You drill down through that, sometimes it's the leader not addressing discipline. So when you can get those kind of variables and say, okay, the data can help you put a spotlight on the issue. You don't have to hammer people all the time with data, but it puts a spotlight on issues that you can fix and make it better. So take care of your teachers before they walk out, because once they walk out, they're not going to tell you the real reason they left.
This is absolutely true. All right, so let's take that a step up, because principals actually made you guys this top 10 this year, issues with principals. So speak a little bit into that, because we know that most principals are typically the top of the food chain within their schools. So what does that look like for principals? Like, why are we not able to retain principals, or what are some of the issues that you guys found with principals as to why they're leaving and they can't be retained either?
It's part of the same issue, Ricardo. It's that environment. If it becomes a toxic environment, if you're dealing with gangs in your community, again, it's hard for a school to outperform its community. There's a school here in Metro Atlanta a year, 2 years ago, that they found out all of a sudden that about 50 of their little elementary school kids had been living in an abandoned apartment, and they got evicted.
Oh my gosh.
And the school rallied around those kids, found some temporary housing, gave them some clothes and food. Their test scores were low, but I wouldn't say that's a failing school. They were underperforming, but they were not a failing school. But it's hard for that school to outperform its community. Some do, but it goes back to a quality leader, being able to recruit and retain quality teaching. We've got a great tool in Georgia. It's called the Georgia Leadership Institute for School Improvement, GLISI, so they're affectionately called GLISI. But I say that's one of the best reform strategies we have in Georgia. It helps and supports principals. It helps them do a better job with their work. It helps them have that vision of where they're going, and helps them understand how to support their teachers. And in fact, you talk about pivoting. They have pivoted quite nicely during this COVID-19, that they have a whole series going on leadership in crisis, because a lot of these principals, particularly some of the young ones, they've never led through a crisis of any kind. So they're needing some support, some collegial support, but also support from people who've gone through a crisis that can help them. But the most important thing, most important variable for a student achievement in schools is a quality teacher. The second most is a quality principal. That's not only in our top 10, but it's also in those 7 buckets of high policy areas for high performing states and countries.
Okay, so I guess one of my thought process is there enough programs to help principals set agendas, set atmospheres, set cultures that will embody good core values for teachers who want to stick around and teachers to do kind of the same things with their classrooms? Do we have enough programs to prepare principals to do that kind of stuff?
We do. And it's not just not just GLSSI that does that. There are other organizations, PAGE, Professional Association of Georgia Educators, that provide some training. The Superintendent's Association. There's several that provide training. There's, of course, organizations outside of Georgia who love to come in and make money here. But that's part of the key. And what concerns me going into this next school year, while we have some of those supports, when schools are cutting 14% of their budget, one of the first things that goes is professional development. It's not an immediate hit. It's not like taking a teacher out of a classroom, but is it an eventual hit? It's an eventual hit on the performance of that school and how teachers feel about if they're needing to better teach reading or diagnose reading deficiencies. They're not going to get that kind of training. Principals aren't going to get the support from GLSSI. There's some scholarship money available, but not enough for a whole team of people to go in for training. So while we have programs in place, I'd say right now in the next year, one of our biggest concerns is going to be schools having the funds to pay for that training that the teachers need and the principal needs.
Yeah, it's something that when they start saying budget, because I think everybody gets this look on their face like, okay, so what are we actually cutting? Because, sometimes they cut stuff and they don't think about the long term of things like what you were just speaking about. So in an ideal situation, because like I said, you get to be the expert today. In an ideal situation, what would set these districts up or set education up for success going into the fall? What would be an ideal situation from your professional opinion?
There are several things. One is we alluded to this earlier, and that is the lack of internet connectivity across the state. AT&T has just stepped up and providing some 400 some Wi-Fi spots across the state that can go on the school buses, and the buses can fan out in the community so that kids can connect. But a lot of the kids don't even have the laptop or the computer to connect to that. So we've learned in this new environment that the technology is paramount. So one of the things we need to do right away is get these kids up to speed, that they have the technology they need so they can still communicate with their school. Because schools are struggling with how do they reopen. We talked about my concern of walking through the schoolhouse door this fall, but is it going to be kids on staggered shifts that they go Monday and Wednesday? Some other kids go Thursday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Or do they have morning shifts and afternoon shifts? And how much is virtual? Well, if any of it's virtual, more kids need laptops or computers, Chromebooks. Mm-hmm. So one thing I would do is be able to support all those kids. And then we talk about professional development, the training for teachers that they can better interact with their kids. They're doing a good job, but they could be doing even better. So that would be a big piece. Another piece is we talked about funding. It scares me about how much that's going to be cut, because we have over 60% of our kids are minority and living in poverty. We need to make sure they have an education to high standards, and the schools have the resources to deliver that. So those are two real important pieces. And then a communication plan out to the communities to help them look at their assets and what do they have that's strong that they can build on, but what's missing that they need to hit right away. And hopefully that they can come together and prioritize those. There'll never be enough human and financial resources. So how can they take those limited resources and help the most kids the best? Short term, in the meantime, help the kids. Read to a kid, or have the kid read to you. Work on that environment and try to help those little kids be in as positive environment as they can. I would encourage your viewers, listeners, to look at this real quick little video clip called Still Face. They can Google Still Face. It's from a Harvard professor. And it's only like 2.5, 3 minutes. We use that in some of our convenings across the state. I've had some people say, our church is working on family issues now. We're going to use that as a conversation starter. Well, look at that still face. And in this interaction, a mother does a role playing with her little baby and turns around with a still face. And the little baby at first just like, hey, mom, what's going on? And then it starts acting out and it screams. And that's just in 2.5 minutes. Imagine that happening in this COVID-19 environment over and over again. That trauma is tough. So we need friends or family to rally around these kids in the short term, read to them, have them read to you, and try to keep them up and positive as much as possible.
Good advice. Good advice. Good advice. All right. So let's get into some advice. I have friends that are in the education system, many of which who are teachers who are now considering going into administration, be it principal, some supporting role. You kind of already paved that way because you've done most of those things. What would be your advice to somebody who's aspiring to maybe move out of the classroom and move more into administration? What would they need? How should they get prepared for a move like that?
Well, first, I'd suggest they try to be a teacher leader. And again, back to the Georgia Leadership Institute, they have programs to help teachers in that leadership role. They could take on helping teach other teachers. They could share in videotaping each other's classes and then talk about that and how could they improve their performance. They could volunteer to be on the school strategic planning team. That gives them a little broader picture outside the classroom. That's one of the things I see has always been a little bit of a hindrance to teachers trying to get into administration. They've not been outside their classroom very often. So if they could visit other classrooms, talk to their colleagues about one another's performance, work on strategic planning to look at the whole school, learn more about, if they don't already, and many teachers do, but learn more about analyzing data. Look at their school data, their student data, and see what they could do to improve and start looking for that, what we always call, so what? What can we do next to help improve this? So get that perspective outside their classroom and then and talk to their leaders in their school. Say, I'm looking at this. What do you think I need? And if they've got a decent relationship with their assistant principal or principal, they might get some of that good guidance and mentoring that they deserve.
Okay. Now they better be watching because I told them we have an education guy today, so they should be watching. If not, I'll be sending that clip to a lot of them because I would love for them to be prepared. All right, so we're down to like our last 6 minutes. The agenda for the remainder of the year for the Georgia Partnership, what does that look like? What are you guys going to be focusing on more towards the end of the year? And how will people get in touch with you guys or you or Robert or whatever?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, when this hit, we had our top 10 issues to watch. And so to speak, we're doubling down on that now. Really looking at leveling the playing field for kids, that we can close some of those opportunity gaps, opportunities they have to learn about high school, learn about college, learn about being a welder. So opportunity gaps and achievement gaps, we're doubling down on that. Some of our other strategies are to work with our EdQuest coalition. And I mentioned right now that we're focusing on the funding. Once we wrap up this legislative session in June, then we'll be working with our colleagues to look at those urgent policy issues for next year, next legislative session, and getting ready for that. We're doing a lot of work. We have what we call our Rural Learning Network. One of our staff members is a strategic partner across the state, and particularly working in rural communities. And we have a podcast that captures the voices of rural Georgians. And there are teachers, parents, principals, superintendent, business leaders, county commissioners. But we want more of those voices. It's like, okay, we're in this response relief mode right now. We want to get to recovery mode. So we've captured some voices now. What's it look like in recovery? What are you dealing with? What issues do you have? What successes do you have? What stories could you share that are positive? So we want a more robust podcasts and voices from our rural learning network. Then it's going to be interesting to see, this may be a pivot. How do we pivot with our convenings? We have our critical issue forums, 3 of those a year on some critical issue. And are they going to become, or 150 people want to come together? They like to network and they like the content, but are they still going to want to come together? So we may be Zooming some of our critical issue forums. So that's in the future for us. We're learning how to deal with the new kinds of media, virtual communications. So we just need to continue that and get smarter and listen to our team about what we might do to get even better.
All right. So how would they get in touch with you guys?
Go to our website, GPEE for Georgia Partnership Excellence in Education, gpee.org. A lot of the materials we've been talking about, Ricardo, are on that website. If they're baby boomers and want hard copies, we can send them.
Because y'all do.
Also, we've got our contact information there, or they can just give us a call and we'll hook them up to whomever they need, or give them some guidance in their career pathway. We love doing that too. It's a good role we like to play.
Okay, so I like to lead the people with steps, because I find that people remember steps. So let's talk specifically to parents. Coming out of this COVID pandemic, what would be 3 top things that you would tell them to focus on in the now that will help better prepare their kids move into the future? I know you kind of got into some of it. What would be probably 3 top things they could do to kind of help their kid navigate this better going into the fall?
I was just on a judging panel for an ebook contest that Emory put on, and they were ebooks about the COVID-19, and it was for kids 6 to 9 years old. They've published those. They are really good to help kids understand this and help with their stress about, is this a bad thing for them and what's it going to do? So I would suggest one for parents, find those kinds of good e-book opportunities or information to share with the kids that they can understand more what's going on. Next is to have conversations about how they feel about it. It's okay to be nervous and concerned as a kid, but let the kids talk about this regardless of their age. I've done that with my grandkids, and there's some are young and some are teenagers, and it's interesting when they share their concerns. And then tap into, I know it's tough for parents being teachers, but try to continue that. And if it's not the math, at least do that reading piece. Read to them, have them read to you. That's going to be a good piece. I think all those are good. And then the exercise. It's really important that they don't just sit around on the device and pine away the day. Get that routine going. They've heard about this, but have those routines during the day and let them do some academic work, have some good social time with parents, but get them outside and make them run around a little bit and have some exercise. Those would be things I'd say to parents.
Okay, I'm supposed to be done, but you said something that kind of, I asked somebody this the other day, and I'm curious because, like I said, you're the subject matter expert today. So before all this happened, we saw a lot of teacher strikes about pay and things of that magnitude, and people kind of felt like, oh, we know this kind of comes to the territory, and you guys knew this when you signed up for it. You really are doing it for the money, it's for the passion. Do you think that COVID was enough, now that we've gotten the people that have kids have a taste of what teachers go through, do you think it's enough to change the conversation about teacher pay?
Oh, I think it could. Absolutely. And I would bet teacher associations are going to ride that pony and say, look, you felt it a little bit. And I said it earlier, teaching is a hard job. And so it's not just teaching content, it's taking care of a lot of other issues in the classroom. So yeah, the short term is going to be tough though, because with they're cutting 14%, there won't be money for that. But down the road, it's really important that legislators hear from their constituents. And if moms and dads and students, when the legislators go back home, talk to them about this, and they could even say, when you get back into a better budget, think about providing teachers a better salary. Then when we get back into the better budget, come back and tell them again. And legislators will remember, I had a parent who came and told me, and they'll repeat that. So let the parents exercise that voice, and it'll help their teachers a whole lot.
All right. And on that note, we want to thank Dr. Stephen Dolinger for being with us today. Thank you, sir, for providing such great information. And we will talk to you guys soon. We'll see you tomorrow at 12 o'clock on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D.